My name is Gil Tatum, and I am a search and rescue officer for the Forestry Service. And there are some things I would like to discuss today. A firefighter who was helping us at this training op told me about a call he'd gone on once, supposedly to help rescue a kid from an absolutely massive tree. He said they didn't give him the details, just that they needed him to come out and help because they lacked the proper equipment. He'd been called out specifically because this thing was so huge that the SARs didn't feel safe trying to climb it. He'd been a tree trimmer before joining the VFD, so it was easy enough for him to grab his old equipment and come help out. He was led out about 2 miles, and the team stopped at one of the biggest trees in the area and pointed up. He laughed and asked the op captain how the kid had gotten up there in the first place, made some jokes about the old cat in the tree thing, but the captain just shook his head and told him to get up there and get the kid down. He said he knew something was up, but he didn't push it. He said that as he climbed this tree, he started wondering if they were playing a prank on him. There was no way this kid should have been able to climb this fucking thing in the first place. It was massive at the base, but about halfway up it started tapering and almost had to turn back a few times because he really didn't think it was going to hold him. But he said he kept going, and when he was just about at the top, he saw a flash of blue in the branches. He saw the kid's shirt sort of caught in a branch. He called out to him and told him to come near him, if he could, but he didn't say anything back. He kept moving, calling the kid's name and telling him not to be scared, and that he was there to help. By the time he got to him, he knew he wasn't going to answer. He found him, or what was left of him, cradled in the fork of a branch, and the fact that he was up there was sheer luck. If he'd fallen any other way, he'd have come crashing down. It wouldn't have mattered, though, because this kid was long dead before he ended up in that tree. He doesn't know who put him there, or how, or even why, but it was fucking sick. The kid's intestines had popped out of his mouth and were hanging in the tree branches. It was like some sick fucking Christmas tree, the way they were draped all over everything. He got a better look and saw that they'd even popped out of his anus. His guts were hanging out the bottom of his pants. His eyes were gone, he assumed shoved out from whatever forced him to pop like a fucking stress ball. You ever seen a body that's been floating in water for a long time? How their tongues kind of swell up and stick out? His was like that. He remembers because there were flies crawling all over it. He thinks he must have gone into shock because he just pushed the kid down with a stick. Broke off a branch, just kind of poked him until he fell. He doesn't know why he did that. He almost lost his job because of that. But man, the thought of hauling that kid down over his shoulder the whole way, gathering his guts up and coiling them around him like rope so they wouldn't get snagged, he couldn't do it. He's seen a lot of dead kids, but that was enough. He's seen a kid who hid in a full bathtub during a house fire, boiled him alive, turned him into literal soup. But this, he didn't know what did this, but the thought of touching the kid's body made him feel like he was going to lose his mind. He heard him hit the ground and figured everyone would freak out, but they knew he was dead when they sent him up there. They didn't say anything, but they didn't shout or freak out or anything. He got to the bottom, and he started to get up in the captain's face, asking him who he thought he was sending him up there when they knew damn well the kid was dead. But he just told him it was none of his concern, and thanked him for getting the evidence down. He remembers he said that. He remembers it specifically because it was so weird to hear it phrased that way. The evidence. Like he wasn't even a person. Like he'd never been a little kid who got lost and had something fucking unspeakable happen to him. The captain had a crew lead him back out of the woods, but he and 2 others stayed behind, and he thought that was weird. Why wouldn't they have him help get the kid out? He tried asking, but the guys leading him out just told him they couldn't discuss an open case. I asked him what he thought had happened to the poor kid, and he got really pensive and thought about it for a moment. He thought it would have had to have been a crush injury of some kind, based on how his guts came out like that. But with those injuries, you see massive contusions under the skin, obvious trauma. This wasn't like that. It was almost like the kid got caught in a big vacuum and had his guts sucked out. But even then, there was no trauma. None at all. It bothers us. It bothers the hell out of us. One of the vets at a training op I was at recently asked if he could share a story about the stairs. and some thoughts he had about them. He was glad I've decided to share these. He thinks it's important that people be aware of what's out there, especially since the Forest Service is doing such a good job of covering it all up. I asked him what he meant, and he asked me what I meant. The lack of any kind of media attention, no coverage of missing kids or bodies found miles from where they got lost in the first place. David Polides hit this right on the head. The Forest Service is doing everything they can to keep people coming here, even if it isn't safe. I mean, to be fair, it's not like these things happen every day, but the numbers add up, and it's worth looking into, especially the stairs. He was surprised I hadn't ever mentioned the upside-down ones. I didn't even know what he was talking about. I couldn't remember him talking about these at all, ever, and he seemed almost somewhat incredulous. He couldn't believe that I've been on this job for so long without seeing them, and no one told me about them either. I shrugged and asked him to elaborate. There's the normal stairs, as he started, the ones that pop up when you're out a ways. He knows I know about them, but sometimes he's run across ones that are flipped upside down. And I guess it would be like if you had a dollhouse and the stairs were a separate piece. Now take that, flip it upside down, so the top step is stuck in the dirt, and put it out into the woods. They're like that. He didn't see them as often, but they're odd, to say the least. And it makes me think of footage taken after a tornado when houses are all blown apart and random things are left standing, like chimneys and garden walls. Those ones freak me out more than normal ones do, because I can't really write those off as easily. I don't scare very easily, but the idea stuck with me, and it bothers me. I'm going to try and find out more about them, but he also mentioned how many people were bothered by the guy with no face. He got really excited and told me he'd seen something similar. He was out on a training exercise a few years ago, and he was camped out in his tent, and he heard someone walking around outside of camp. You're told not to wander far, which you know, so I wondered if it was some rookie who'd gotten up to pee and couldn't find his way back. Then he reminded me of a man in one of our groups a few years ago who almost fell off the damn mountain. Well, he's paranoid about it happening again, so he gets up to see what was going on. He goes to the edge of camp and calls to whoever it was and told him the camp was this way. But they kept going back out into the woods, so we went after them. He knows it was stupid, but he was half asleep, and he just really didn't want to deal with some idiot getting hurt. He followed this thing on a dead straight course for about a mile, and then it stopped on the edge of a little river. He couldn't see the outline of it because the water was reflecting the moon, and it looked just like an ordinary guy. He had a pack on, and it looked like he was facing him. He asked if he was okay, if he needed help, and he cocked his head like he didn't understand. He always has a pocket knife on him, and it's got a little thumblet attached to it, so he turned that on and lit up its chest, so it wouldn't blind him. He was breathing slow and deep, so we wondered if he was sleepwalking. He went closer and asked him again if he was okay. He moved the light up, and something didn't see right, so he stopped. He kept breathing in this real slow, deep breaths, and he sort of figured out gradually that that's what was bothering him. It was like he was pretending to breathe, but not actually doing it. His breaths were too even and deep, and all of his movements were exaggerated, like his shoulders going up and his chest moving. My friend told him to identify himself, and he made this muffled noise. He moved the light up, and I shit you not, this guy had no face, just smooth skin. My friend freaks out. He sort of fumbles with his light, but he sees him move towards him, but he didn't actually move. He doesn't know how to explain it, but 1 second he was at the edge of the river, and the next he was 5 feet from him. He never looked away or blinked. It was like he moved so fast his brain couldn't keep up. He tripped and fell on his ass, and he could see this line open up on its throat. It stretched up to its ears, and its head tilted back, and it raised a smile at him with its throat. There wasn't any blood, just this gaping dark hole, and my friend swears he smiled at him with the gash in his throat. Well, my friend gets up and runs as fast as he can. Back to camp, of course. He couldn't hear the thing following him, but he felt like he was always right behind him, even though when he looked back he couldn't see him. He calmed down when he got back to camp. The fire was still going, and he guessed that pack mentality of being with other people made him stop and breathe a little. He waited by the fire to see if he'd followed him, but he didn't hear anything else for a few hours, so he went back to bed. He knows it sounds weird, but the whole thing was just so surreal that it was almost like he immediately wrote it off as just his imagination. Most recently, we were telling ghost stories one night before bed just to scare each other and poke fun at whoever got creeped out. Most of the time it's the rookies, but one woman told a story that actually managed to get under my skin a little, and I know the same was true for others. She said it was true, but then again, every ghost story told around a campfire is true. Somehow, though, I don't think she was making it up. It happened to have that ring of truth that only really traumatizing events have. She said that when she was a kid, she and her friend used to go out into the woods behind her house a lot. She lived in northern Maine, where there's a lot of dense, unpopulated national forest. She said the woods up there aren't like they are here. They're so thick in places that the trees block out the sun almost completely. She and her friend grew up there, so they weren't scared of being out there alone, but they did always maintain a sense of caution in certain areas. She said it was never really talked about, but they always knew not to go more than a mile or two beyond their homes. The adults never said why, but it was an unspoken rule that no one ventured out that far. She and her friend made up stories about bears as big as houses that lived out there, and they used to scare each other by hiding and making growling noises while the others searched for them. She said one summer there was a series of awful storms that blew down a lot of trees and set one part of the forest a few miles behind her house on fire. Fire crews got it under control quite quickly, but she said some of the men came back not quite the same. It was like they'd been to war. You could tell who'd really gotten scared because they had the same look on their faces. I think it's called shell shock. The two friends said they were like walking dead people. They didn't smile or say anything, and if you went up to them, and most of them left town as soon as everything was over. She asked her parents about it, but they said they didn't know what she was talking about. Once everyone was told the woods were safe again, the two friends decided to try and hike out to where the fire had been. They didn't tell their parents where they were going, and it was pretty exciting to think that they were disobeying them like that. They hiked out about 2 miles or so, and they started seeing burnt trees and other things. She remembers her friend got really upset because they found the skeleton of a deer curled up under a tree, and it practically had to drag her away. She wanted to bury it, but they didn't want her touching it because its antlers were weird. They can't remember why. They just remember thinking that there was something wrong with them, and it didn't want either of them going near it. The farther they went, the more burnt everything got. Eventually there was no standing trees, and it was like being on another planet. Almost nothing green, just brown and black everywhere. They were standing there looking at it all when they both heard someone shouting in the distance. They panicked because they thought it was their dad, and that he was going to tell them they were grounded. The one friend broke off and went to hide behind a big rock because she said she didn't want to get caught out there. Her parents had forbidden her to come out in the woods at all, and she'd lied and told them they were going to a movie. My friend followed her. They kept listening. They could hear the voice getting closer and realized they were calling for help. They thought maybe it was some hiker who'd gotten lost and needed directions back to town. They used to happen all the time. She could tell that he was following her voice, so she kept calling out until she saw him running in the distance. He got closer, and she could see that his face was all red. She told her friend to give her pack, because she had a first aid kit. She made this noise like she was grossed out, and asked if she had seen his face. She told her to shut up, and jogged up to meet him. She stopped about halfway, and when he stopped in front of her, she could see that his nose and lips and part of his forehead were all gone. It was like they'd been sliced clean off. He was bleeding bad, and she saw that the knees of his pants were red too. She took a step back, but she was too scared to move much more. and he grabbed her by the shoulders. It felt like quite a shock, and she jerked back. He started babbling, and she couldn't tell what he was saying, except that he kept asking how long he'd been gone. He asked where his unit was, but she just shook her head. He looked her over and saw her Walkman and screamed. He just kept babbling and touching his face, and she realized he wasn't wearing the right clothing. He had some kind of weird gray cloth jacket and almost formal pants, and the jacket had these weird buttons and red borders on it. She kept shaking her head and telling him she couldn't understand what he was saying. She went to open the first aid kit, but the man screamed and said the only thing she could ever understand. "Don't touch me. You'll make me go back there." After that, he ran off, and she could hear him screaming the whole time. When she couldn't hear him anymore, she turned around, and her friend was crying. They just turned and ran back towards town. They never did figure out where that man was from, or where he wound up.